Chapter 1. The Battle Where a Star Went Dark. The war over Vera's crown was never supposed to be a war at all. It began as diplomacy, the way most tragedies do, with formal smiles and polite lies, and ended with the kind of silence that only follows when too many ships have burned in the same patch of void. Vera's crown was the name of the orbital ring that encircled the ocean world of HFY, an ancient construct of pearl metal and living circuitry left behind by the first builders, something every empire wanted and none could build again. And on the day it fell, the sky above the ring looked like a cracked mirror reflecting 1,000 engine flares. The Selenari Dominion had held the crown for 2 centuries, guarding it with a fleet that was as much tradition as defense. And Princess Cyrene Val Ashael, heir to the Dominion's tide throne, had insisted on being there when the invaders arrived, not because she was reckless, as her enemies would later claim, but because Selenari royalty was bound by an oath older than their language. When the crown was threatened, the bloodline stood on its rim and watched the storm, so the people below would know they were not being abandoned. Cyrene was not a soldier by training, but she had been raised among admirals and navigators, taught the mathematics of orbital combat before she was taught poetry, and she wore her ceremonial crest helm like a promise rather than decoration. Even so, when the first wave of enemy ships slipped out of dark space like knives sliding from a sleeve, the Dominion's command staff begged her to withdraw to the sheltered core of the ring, to the vaulted chambers where the first builders had once controlled weather and gravity with a thought. Cyrene refused, and her refusal turned into legend in the same way all royal refusals do, at first as inspiration, later as accusation. The invaders called themselves the Harum Pact, a coalition of corporate dynasties and conquered client species stitched together by profit and fear. And their ships had the brutal simplicity of things designed by accountants. Armored blocks with engines oversized, weapons mounted like receipts, and no regard for beauty, because beauty did not increase quarterly returns. They didn't want to occupy the crown for its symbolism. They wanted its living circuitry, the way it could reshape energy flows, the way it could command the tides and the planet's magnetic field, the way it could become a lever over every trade route within 3 sectors. The Dominion fleet met them in a defensive arc, frigates and carriers moving with the practiced precision of generations. And for the first hour of battle, the Selenari held shield walls blooming like translucent petals, torpedoes curling into elegant spirals, interceptor wings glinting as they danced between detonations. Cyrene watched from the bridge of the flagship moonlit Resolve, hands resting on a railing that felt warm, as if the ship itself carried a heartbeat. She listened to casualty reports and did not flinch, which was both admirable and frightening, because it meant she understood what she was demanding of her people. When a Dominion destroyer snapped in half, venting atmosphere into starlight, she closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them and asked for updated firing solutions. She did not weep, she did not shout. She simply stayed present, visible, unwilling to let fear rewrite her posture. Then the Karum revealed the weapon they had been saving, a gravitic spear, a narrow, focused distortion that could punch through shield harmonics by turning the space around a target into a collapsing throat. It was not elegant. It was obscene, like using the weight of a planet as a hammer. The spear fired once, and one of the Dominion's shield pylons on the crown itself, an ancient first builder node the Selenari had retrofitted, imploded into a blue-white bloom that made every sensor scream. The protective arc around the ring staggered. The Dominion fleet adjusted, admirals barking commands, ships shifting to compensate. But the spear fired again, and this time it struck the moonlit Resolve dead center. For a heartbeat, the flagship's shields flared brighter than a small sun. For a heartbeat, it looked like the Selenari might survive sheer stubbornness. Then the spear's distortion ate through the shield layers and bit into the ship's spine, and the bridge shook so violently that officers were thrown from their stations like dolls. Emergency bulkheads slammed down. Lights died. The air filled with smoke and the metallic taste of fear.
Saren was knocked to the deck. Something struck her crest helm, shattering the ceremonial lattice and cutting her temple. She tasted blood, and the taste grounded her more than any training ever had. Through the chaos, she heard her captain shouting her name, heard hands trying to lift her, heard the ship's AI warning that hull integrity was failing in sections 8 through 12. She forced herself upright, gripping the railing so hard her fingers ached, and looked at the tactical holoscreen as it flickered. The flagship was breaking. Not fully, not yet, but the spear had carved a wound too deep. "Evacuate!" the captain roared at her, voice raw. "Princess, we must evacuate!"
Siren's gaze went to the viewport, to the crown ring glowing faintly below like a halo around a blue planet, to the ocean world that held her people, her history, her mother's grave, and she realized the Harum were not only trying to win, they were trying to make the Selenari watch their own mythology burn. She made a choice that would be debated for years. "No," she said, voice calm in the smoke. "If we evacuate, the fleet breaks formation to cover us. The crown falls faster." She stepped toward the command console, ignoring the blood on her face. "Route remaining power to the crown's pylon nodes. Reinforce the ring. We buy time. We hold." The captain stared at her like she had become someone else, someone made of tides and stone. "You'll die," he whispered. Saren looked at him and smiled faintly. Not the smile of someone who wanted martyrdom, but of someone who had accepted a fact the way sailors accept storms. "Then let me die where they can see," she said. "Let my people know I didn't run." The ship shuddered again, harder. The gravitic wound widened. Alarms screamed. The bridge began to tear. Saren's last memory of that moment was not of fear, but of sound. The deep groan of metal surrendering, the crackling of energy arcs, and somewhere beneath it, a low, mournful tone from the ship's AI. A funeral note it played only when its probability models crossed into certainty. A blast ruptured the bridge. Wind tore through, sucking papers, tools, screams into vacuum. Someone grabbed Saren's arm. She didn't know who. She reached for the command console anyway, fingers brushing the activation plate that would divert power to the crown nodes. The screen flashed confirmation. The crown's shield arc brightened for a moment below. Time purchased in blood. Then the bridge broke open fully, and the vacuum took her. The last thing Saren saw before her vision narrowed was the ocean world turning slowly beneath the ring, serene and indifferent, as if it did not know its daughter was falling. When the battle ended, hours later, after the Dominion fleet retreated in broken formation, and the crown was half occupied by Harum forces, there were lists, there were numbers, there were grief rituals conducted in quiet corridors where the surviving officers pretended their hands weren't shaking. And there was one name that hit harder than any other. Princess Saren Valashel, confirmed lost, presumed dead. The Dominion's people on Ashale gathered on shorelines and watched the ring burn in the sky, and the mourning banners rose like dark kelp in the wind. They believed the princess had died as she said she would, where everyone could see. But in the debris field beyond Veyra's crown,
Drifting among shattered hull plates and frozen clouds of oxygen, something else was moving through the wreckage with deliberate patience, as if searching for a single heartbeat in an ocean of silence.
Chapter 2. The Stranger Who Didn't Salvage, but Searched.
His ship did not broadcast a registry code, and that alone should have made him suspicious to every patrol drone still limping around the battle's aftermath. But the void was full of broken sensors and exhausted protocols. And in the hours after a major engagement, the universe becomes briefly lawless in a way that invites predators and saints alike. The stranger's craft was small, wedge-shaped, built for slipping through asteroid fields and docking clamps without permission, its hull plated in matte black that drank starlight rather than reflecting it. Its engine signature was oddly quiet, not stealthy in the theatrical sense, but restrained, tuned for endurance rather than show. He moved through the debris field like a diver in a graveyard sea, rotating his ship with careful thruster pulses, extending manipulator arms to push aside twisted panels and netting cables, scanning each drifting body, not with greed, but with something that looked dangerously like tenderness. He was human, or at least he wore a suit shaped like a human body, and his voice, when he spoke to his ship's AI, had the rough, warm edges of human speech. Again, he murmured, as the scanner completed another pass and returned nothing but static.
Run the biospectrum sweep again. Narrow it. Look for low-temperature respiration. Look for anything that's not fully gone. His AI responded in a soft tone, almost apologetic. Probability of survivability in this debris zone is minimal, it said. Time since hull rupture exceeds. I know, he cut in. Not angry, simply unwilling to accept the numbers as a verdict.
Do it anyway.
His name was Elias Rook, though nobody in the Dominion had heard it, and if the Karoom Pact had a file on him, it was buried under the kind of red flags that made bureaucrats nervous. Ex-contract medtech, ex-salvage operator, former resident of fringe stations where people learned to keep their morals flexible so they didn't snap. He had been near Vera's crown, not as a soldier or a traitor, but as an unpaid witness, one more drifter drawn to the gravitational pull of history, because even the fringes felt the shockwave when empires fought over ancient wonders. He had watched the battle from a safe distance at first, intending to leave before the worst of it reached him. But then he had seen the flagship's shields flare, seen the gravitic spear bite, and heard on an open emergency channel a voice that carried through the static with eerie clarity. Calm, female, issuing orders like prayers. It was not the voice of someone begging for rescue. It was the voice of someone choosing where to fall. Something in Elias had tightened, a memory of other voices like that. Children in station corridors, workers in med bays, people who did not believe the universe owed them mercy and still refused to die quietly. He told himself he was looking for survivors in general. He told himself it was humanitarian. But the truth was simpler and more irrational. He was looking for her. The scanner finally pinged something faint, so faint his AI almost dismissed it as sensor drift. A low, irregular bioelectric signature, not a human pulse, something else. Elias's hands tightened on the controls. "Mark it," he said. "Lock vector." He extended the manipulator arm, nudged a panel aside, and his suit's external cameras caught a flash of pale iridescent skin in the darkness. There, wedged between two structural beams, was a body. The suit around her was torn, its seals compromised, its emergency gel partially deployed and now frozen. Her crest helm was gone. Her hair, silver black, typical of Selenari royalty, floated in stiff strands. Her face was pale, lips blue, eyes closed. But the scanner insisted on something stubborn. The faintest oscillation of a heartbeat, slowed by cold, protected by the last mercy of vacuum-induced hypothermia. Her species, amphibious adapted, with a unique oxygen-binding system, could sometimes survive longer without atmosphere than humans could, especially when the cold slowed their metabolism. Survival in space was still improbable, still miraculous, but miracles did not care about probability. They cared about timing. Elias didn't waste time marveling. He cut the debris loose with a plasma tool, careful not to jolt her body. He pulled her into the ship's small pressurized bay, sealed the hatch, and flooded the chamber with warmed oxygen mix tailored to what his scanner guessed her lungs could accept. He peeled back the torn suit fabric, found the portable port embedded in her collarbone, and connected it to his medkit with hands that moved like they'd done this 1,000 times under worse conditions. His medkit was not Dominion grade. It was salvage, patched together from 3 different manufacturers, but it was built by someone who understood that good enough was sometimes the thin line between death and a story that continued. He injected a stabilization cocktail to prevent reperfusion shock, introduced micro-warming pulses to her core, and monitored her heart as it tried to remember its own rhythm. For a long time, minutes that felt like hours, nothing happened. The heart fluttered faintly. The reading stayed low. Elias's AI kept offering gentle warnings about neurological damage, about oxygen deprivation, about the cruelty of false hope. Elias ignored it and kept working, because he knew something the AI did not. Hope wasn't a prediction. It was an action. When Saren finally coughed, the sound was wet and small, like an ocean creature waking on a dry shore. Elias's breath caught. Her eyes fluttered under her lids. Her bioluminescent facial filigree, faint patterns Selinari carried, usually subtle, flickered weakly, then dimmed. She gasped, drawing air like it was unfamiliar. Elias leaned close, voice steady. "Easy," he murmured. "Don't fight it. You're safe. He hesitated, because he didn't know what words would land. "You're alive," he finished, as if saying it aloud could anchor it. Saren's eyes opened. They were the color of deep seawater under stormlight, and they focused on him with startling sharpness despite her weakness. For one heartbeat she looked confused, disoriented. Then her gaze hardened with the reflex of someone trained to assess threats. Her hand jerked, trying to reach for a weapon that wasn't there. Elias lifted his hands, palms open. "No weapons," he said quickly. "I'm not Karum. I'm just a stranger who didn't like how your story ended." Saren tried to speak. Her throat worked. The words came out as a rasp, half-drowned. "My crown?" Elias swallowed. He could have lied. He could have softened it. But royalty didn't need softness. It needed truth to make decisions. "The crown is contested," he said quietly. "Your fleet pulled back. The pact has boots on parts of the ring. Your people think you're dead."
Saren's eyes widened, and something in her expression shifted. Not fear for herself, but a deep, immediate grief that looked like anger disguised as sorrow. She tried to sit up and failed, muscles shaking. Elias caught her shoulder gently, pushing her back down. "You can't move yet," he warned. "You were in vacuum. Your body still—" "I must return," Sarian hissed, voice gaining strength in pure will. "They will—" She stopped, coughing again, pain racking her ribs. Elias waited until her breathing steadied, then said the words that would change everything. "If you go back right now, you'll be captured, or you'll die properly this time, and your people will lose their air in a way that doesn't even buy them time." Saren glared at him, but her eyes held something else too, the recognition of logic, even when it hurt.
"Who are you?" she demanded.
Elias hesitated. "Elias," he said. "Nobody important." Saren's lip curled, weak but sharp. Nobody crosses a war debris field searching for a corpse unless they are either a scavenger or a fool, she rasped. Which are you?
Elias met her gaze and answered honestly. Today, he said, a fool.
The ship drifted deeper into the shadow of a broken cruiser to avoid patrol scans. Outside, the debris field glittered like a graveyard of stars. Inside, the Princess of HFY lay breathing in a stranger's tiny medbay, alive when the universe had already written her obituary. And somewhere on HFY below, mourning banners snapped in the wind for a woman who was not dead, only hidden in the void, waiting for her strength to return, waiting for the moment the galaxy would learn that death had been an assumption, not a fact. Chapter 3. A Princess in Hiding and the Price of Being Alive. Saren's recovery was not graceful. Stories like to pretend that survival came with triumphant music and quick healing, but reality came with nausea, tremors, and the humiliating fact that the body does not care about titles when it has been half frozen in vacuum. Elias's ship, the Wisp, was built for one person and their equipment, not for an heir to a throne, and every inch of space became negotiation. Saren needed humidity levels higher than human comfort to keep her lung membranes from tearing. Elias needed dry air for some of his electronics not to corrode. Saren needed nutrient gels rich in saline and trace minerals that mimicked ocean water. Elias had only ration paste and a few medical-grade electrolyte packets. They compromised in the messy way strangers do when forced into the same small room. Elias set up a small vapor basin near her bunk to humidify her side of the cabin and sealed his electronics in protective film. Saren learned to swallow human rations without complaint, though her face tightened every time, as if insulted by the blandness of it. Pride would have made her demand better. Exhaustion made her accept what existed. In the first days, Saren spoke little except in questions, each one sharp as a knife. The status of the crown, the fleet's retreat vector, the names of missing admirals, the likelihood that the Karum would attempt orbital bombardment to force surrender. Elias answered what he could and admitted what he didn't know. He had no classified feeds, only open transmissions and what his ship's scanners caught. That honesty seemed to irritate her at first, then strangely comfort her, because liars usually decorated their ignorance with confidence. When she finally had the strength to stand, wobbly, clinging to a handhold, she stared out the Wisp's narrow viewport at the distant glow of Vera's crown and whispered something in her own language, a phrase Elias's translator couldn't parse. The grief in it needed no translation. She had sacrificed herself to buy time, and now time had been bought, but not enough. The crown still burned. Elias, for his part, tried not to stare at her too much, because the sight of royalty stripped of ceremony was uncomfortable in a way he couldn't articulate. Saren was thinner than he expected, all muscle and bone, built for swimming in heavy water gravity. Her skin marked with faint scars from training and childhood accidents, her bioluminescent filigree sometimes brightening involuntarily with emotion. She was not a fragile princess from fairy stories. She was a leader raised in a world that understood tides, pressure, resistance, inevitability. And yet she was also young enough that the moment she was alone, her shoulders sometimes slumped like someone carrying more than a body should. Elias had seen that posture in medbays on fringe stations. The posture of people who were never allowed to be weak publicly, so they learned to compress weakness into private seconds. The danger found them anyway. On the 5th day after Saren woke, the Wisp's proximity alarms triggered. A small patrol craft moving along the debris perimeter, scanning for survivors, salvage, and anything valuable enough to justify paperwork. The craft's broadcast signature identified it as Harum Security, which meant corporate enforcers with guns and legal fiction. Elias killed his engine output and drifted behind a chunk of wreckage, holding his breath as if silence could hide heat. Saren, still unsteady, moved toward the console. "If they scan our life signs," she began. Elias cut her off.
"They won't," he whispered. "Not if I scramble our thermal profile." He rerouted power, dampened the ship's heat vents, and watched the patrol craft glide past like a shark. It did not stop. It did not notice. Only after it disappeared did Elias exhale. Saren's gaze stayed on the empty space where the patrol had been. "They are hunting," she said quietly. Elias nodded. "You are worth more alive than dead," he said, then regretted the bluntness. Saren didn't flinch. "Yes," she replied, voice flat. "To them, I am a lever. To my people, I am an anchor. Both are heavy." She turned toward him. "Why did you save me?" The question hung between them like a pressure change. Elias could have given a heroic answer. He could have said duty, compassion, justice. Those were all partially true. But he knew partial truths were the most dangerous lies. "Because I heard you on the emergency channel," he said finally. "Because you sounded like someone who was about to die for other people, and I have seen too many people die like that while everyone else keeps walking." Saren studied him, expression unreadable. "So you hate injustice," she said. Elias shrugged, a small tired motion. "I hate waste," he admitted. "I hate when the universe throws something rare and good into a furnace and calls it normal." That earned him the faintest hint of a smile. "You speak like a Selenari," Saren murmured. Then her smile faded. "If you bring me back, you paint a target on your own head." Elias didn't argue. He already felt the target forming. The Karum would pay for Saren alive, sedated, in chains. The Dominion would also pay, but differently, with gratitude, with titles, with obligations that would wrap around Elias's life like netting. Saving a princess did not end with applause. It ended with politics. The next threat came not from the Harum, but from Saren's own side. An encrypted Dominion beacon suddenly lit up on Elias's console, so tight and precise it could only have come from high-grade military equipment. The Wisp had been scanned by someone far more capable than the Harum patrol. Elias's stomach tightened as a voice came through, clipped and formal. "Unknown vessel, you are operating in restricted combat salvage territory. Identify yourself." Elias glanced at Saren. Her face had gone still. "If they know you're here," Elias whispered, "they might." "They might kill you," Saren finished calmly. "If they believe you captured me." She straightened, even though it hurt. "Open the channel," she ordered, and her voice carried an authority that made the ship's small cabin feel suddenly like a throne room. Elias opened it. Saren leaned toward the mic, breath steady, and spoke her own identification code, a series of tonal harmonics and syllables that carried royal encryption in them, something no imposter could mimic. There was a pause on the line. Elias imagined the Dominion officer on the other end going pale, thinking they had just heard a ghost speak. Then the voice returned, no longer clipped, but trembling with disbelief. "Highness?" it whispered. Saren's eyes closed briefly, and when she opened them again, they shone with wet light she refused to let fall. "I am alive," she said. "Do not broadcast this.
Route all responses through secure channel Theta C. If the pact learns, we understand, the officer cut in quickly, awe and fear mixing. Where are you? We will retrieve you at once. No, Saren said, and the word hit like a command. Not yet. My survival is a weapon. If you retrieve me openly, the pact will hunt your ships and slaughter civilians to force my surrender. You will wait until I tell you where. Understood? Silence. Then, understood, Highness. Saren looked at Elias then, and something unspoken passed between them. She had just chosen to remain hidden, to stay in his tiny ship, because returning too soon would endanger her people. It was a cruel logic, but leadership often was. After the channel closed, Elias let out a long breath. So, he said, voice dry, your own fleet can kill me, and your enemies can pay to torture me. Great week. Saren's mouth twitched. You chose to be a fool, she reminded him softly. Elias laughed under his breath, then sobered. What now? He asked. Saren stepped to the viewport again, staring at the crown's distant glow. Now, she said, voice low, we turn my death into a lie that hurts them. She turned back to him, eyes fierce. They believe I am dead. They will overreach. They will loosen their guard around the crown's core. If I return at the right moment, if I appear alive where they expect a corpse, then the pact will fracture. Their allies will panic. Their contracts will fail. And my people will see that the tide has not taken me. Elias stared. You want to go back into the ring? He said, disbelief rising. With one small ship? Saren nodded once. Not to fight a fleet, she said. To steal the one thing that makes the crown worth fighting over. Her gaze sharpened. The first builder heart node. Elias's blood cooled. He had heard rumors. A central control core hidden within the ring's oldest segment, capable of redirecting power flows, controlling gravity modulation, locking docking bays, turning the ring into a fortress or a prison. If Saren could reach it, she could regain the crown without a frontal assault. But reaching it meant infiltrating territory crawling with Karum enforcers and corporate hackers. Elias looked at her. This woman, who had died in the public story, and now plotted to weaponize her own resurrection, and realized the strangest truth. Saving her had not brought peace into his life. It had brought a storm with a plan. And yet, beneath the fear, he felt something like exhilaration, because some part of him that had spent years patching broken machines for credits was hungry for something larger than survival. He had given a princess back her breath. Now, he was about to help her steal back a crown. Chapter 4. The Return That Shattered the Pact. They approached Vera's crown like a ghost approaching its own funeral. Elias killed all unnecessary emissions and let the wisp drift on minimal thruster bursts, using debris shadows and the ring's own energy haze to mask their profile. The crown was not a simple ring. It was a layered construct, segments overlapping like shells. Its inner corridors lit by bioluminescent conduits that pulsed faintly, even under occupation, as if the ancient structure resented the boots that walked on it. Karum's ships clustered around its docking spokes like parasites on a whale, their corporate insignias glaring, their patrol drones sweeping in predictable arcs. Predictable, Elias learned, was the only mercy in enemy behavior. Corporations loved routines because routines made costs measurable. Saren had studied those routines through stolen sensor feeds from Elias's console, mapping them like tie charts. She moved with more strength now,
still not fully healed, but fueled by the sharpness of purpose, and the bioluminescent filigree on her skin glowed brighter when she concentrated, forming faint patterns that resembled Selenari command codes.
Elias asked once if the glow was voluntary. Saren's answer was quiet. "It is my body remembering who I am," she said. "It refuses to stay dim."
Their plan was not heroic. It was surgical. They would not engage patrol ships. They would slip into a maintenance lock on the Crown's underside, an access point too small for standard vessels, designed for drones and service pods, ignored because it didn't fit the Karoom's assumptions about how threats arrived. Elias guided the Wisp into position, matching rotation with the ring spin until the lock appeared like a mouth opening in slow motion. The docking clamps latched with a soft thud. For a moment, the ship was still. Elias's heart hammered loud enough that he imagined it echoing through the hull. "Once we're inside," Saren whispered, checking the compact plasma cutter Elias had given her, "we move fast. If we are caught, we die," Elias finished, because naming it felt less terrifying than pretending it wasn't true. Saren looked at him, and for the first time her expression softened without weakness. "You could still leave," she said. "You have done enough. You have already changed my fate." Elias exhaled, gaze flicking to the sealed hatch. He thought of the Dominion's mourning banners on shorelines he had never seen, the way people had grieved someone who was not dead, the way the Karoom had already begun carving the Crown into contracts. "If I leave," he said quietly, "then your death stays useful to them. I didn't pull you out of vacuum just to let you drown in politics." He forced a grin. "Besides, I've come this far. It would be rude to stop being a fool now." Saren's mouth twitched, and she nodded once. "Then stay close," she said. "When I move, you move." They cycled the lock. Cold air hissed. The hatch opened into a narrow service corridor lined with ancient panels etched in First Builder script. Symbols like waves and spirals that made Elias's eyes ache to look at too long. The Crown's internal gravity was weak here, shifting slightly with each rotation, making their steps feel like walking on a ship at sea. They moved in silence, following Saren's memorized route. Down a ladder into a duct, across a junction where faint blue light pulsed beneath translucent floor panels, past a sealed door that Saren opened with a code she spoke in harmonic syllables, royal encryption still recognized by the Crown's old systems despite occupation. Elias's breath caught when the door slid open with a sigh, like the ring itself was letting its rightful heir pass. Karoom patrols were everywhere in the main corridors, armored enforcers, drones, corporate techs hauling equipment. But the service network was mostly ignored, too cramped for their egos. Still, danger found them in the form of a single drone that drifted into a junction ahead, lens sweeping. Saren froze. Elias's fingers tightened on his stun button. The drone's lens focused on Saren's face. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Then Saren stepped forward into the drone's scan light, not hiding, not flinching. Her filigree flared bright, the patterns shifting like tide maps, and she spoke one word in the First Builder tongue, a sound that felt like a low ocean note. The drone's status light flickered, then turned green. It rotated away, docile, and drifted off as if it had never seen them. Elias stared, stunned. "What did you just do?" he whispered. Saren's voice was tight with effort. "Reminded it," she whispered back. "This ring was not built for them. Its oldest servants still know the shape of their true commands." They reached the heart node chamber after hours of crawling and bypassing. It was hidden behind a false wall in a segment called the Pearl Vault, where first builder architecture became almost organic, curving ribs of metal that looked like shells, pools of liquid light flowing beneath transparent surfaces. The heart node itself was a sphere suspended in the center of the chamber, spinning slowly, radiating a soft pulse that made Elias's skin prickle. Cables like roots extended from it into the walls, carrying data and power through the ring like blood vessels. Around it, Karum tech teams had set up equipment, portable servers, cutting lasers, interface rigs. They were trying to brute force the heart node, to make it obey corporate authority. They had no idea that a royal key still existed, not until Saren stepped into the chamber. The techs turned. Their faces went pale. One dropped a tool. Another laughed once, sharp and disbelieving, like seeing a dead person walk into your kitchen. A Karum commander in black armor stepped forward, eyes narrowing behind a visor. "Impossible," he snarled. "We confirmed the princess was vented. We saw the flagship break." Saren raised her chin, bloodline posture snapping into place like armor. "You saw what you wanted," she said, voice carrying through the chamber with ocean-deep calm. "You assumed the tide obeyed your contracts." The commander's hand went to his weapon. "Kill her!" he barked. Elias moved, instinct, fear, loyalty tangled, raising his baton. But Saren was faster. She stepped toward the heart node and placed her palm against its surface. The filigree across her skin flared brighter than Elias had ever seen, turning her into a living constellation. She spoke a sequence of harmonic codes, royal, ancient, and something older still. The heart node's pulse changed. The chamber's lights dimmed, then surged. Gravity snapped tighter. The Karum commander stumbled as if the floor had shifted under him. Drones in the corridor outside suddenly powered down. The Karum tech rigs sparked and died. "What?" the commander began, but his voice was drowned by the crown itself waking. Across Vera's crown, docking bay doors slammed shut. Patrol ships found their clamps locking unexpectedly. Weapon systems misaligned. Internal corridors sealed into labyrinth configurations that only first builder logic understood. The ring's shield pylons, damaged but not dead, reoriented, forming a new defensive arc that boxed Karum ships into awkward positions. The crown did not fire like a weapon. It simply rearranged the environment so the invaders were suddenly trapped inside a machine that did not recognize them as authorized.
Saren's voice, amplified through the ring's ancient intercom system, flowed across every corridor and every occupied chamber. "To the Karum Pact," she said, calm as deep water, "you have trespassed on a living artifact you do not understand. Your contracts are void here. Your claim is rejected.
Leave or be sealed until the ring's tides grind you into history."
Karum commanders shouted orders. Some tried to override systems, some tried to flee, but the Crown's oldest logic ignored them. Corporate authority meant nothing to architecture built before corporations existed.
On Asia Hell below, people looked up from shoreline morning fires as the ring's burning segment suddenly shifted, its light pattern changing, forming a spiral of blue-white radiance visible through the atmosphere. Dominion communication arrays, long jammed, crackled back to life with a single broadcast, a visual feed from the heart node chamber. The feed showed Saren, alive, glowing, standing with her hand on the heart node as if she were holding a star steady.
Silence swept across a shale, like a tide pulled backward. Then the world erupted into sound, cries, laughter, prayers, people falling to their knees, people shouting her name into the wind as if volume could make it more real. Dominion admirals aboard retreating ships froze in disbelief as their screens showed their heir standing where death had been recorded.
In the heart node chamber, the Karum commander stared at Saren, weapons still raised but useless now, and his voice cracked with something that was not fear of death, but fear of losing narrative control. "You were dead," he whispered. "You were supposed to be dead." Saren turned her gaze on him, and in that gaze there was the full weight of a leader who had watched too many people suffer under the assumption that power was permanent. "That," she said softly, "is what shocked you. Not that I lived, but that your certainty was wrong." Elias stood behind her, breath ragged, watching history pivot. He expected to feel triumphant. Instead, he felt small and awed, because he realized the stranger in the story was not the hero. He was the hand that pulled someone out of darkness long enough for them to light a whole ring on fire with will. After the Karum forces began surrendering, some forced by sealed corridors, others by panic as their coalition fractured under the news, Saren finally stepped away from the heart node. Her glow dimmed, her knees buckled. Elias caught her before she fell, arms wrapping around her shoulders, feeling how light she still was despite the power she had just commanded. She looked up at him, eyes tired but alive, and whispered, "You brought me back." Elias shook his head, voice hoarse. "No," he said. "I just refused to let you be written off. You did the rest." Saren's mouth curved into a faint smile, one that carried exhaustion, gratitude, and something deeper that neither of them had time to name. "Then," she whispered, "everyone will want to know who you are." Elias laughed softly, almost bitter. "Let them wonder," he said. "Strangers do better work when they're not trying to become legends." Outside, Vera's crown glowed with renewed defense light. The Pack's ships trapped or fleeing. The Dominion's fleet turning back in stunned formation to reclaim what had been half lost. On HAL, mourning banners were lowered and replaced with sails of celebration. The story spread instantly, faster than any official report. The princess had died in the battle. Everyone had seen it, everyone had believed it, until a stranger brought her back alive, and her return broke an empire's assumption like a wave breaking glass. And in the quiet moment before the Dominion's rescue teams reached the heart node, Saren rested her head briefly against Elias's shoulder and let herself be simply human-like for one heartbeat, alive, trembling, and grateful that somewhere in the debris of a war, someone had chosen to search instead of salvage.